first in a series of webinars that the NED Club will be offering to the market over the next few months. And what better way to start than reviewing the results of the previous AGM season and have industry experts to provide insights, opinions, and suggestions on how to prepare for 2021. On that note, I wouldn't like to take up more of your time, and I would like to welcome our panelists, and I will pass to Emilia Varfis, Chief Executive Officer of Velos Advisory. Emilia.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're well. Thank you, Lina. Thank you, everybody that we have as panelists and everybody for joining this webinar. As Lida just said, Greece is undergoing a radical transformation in the field of corporate governance, and this is only the beginning. Greece is catching up with a lot of what's been happening in the rest of Europe, but it's doing so very quickly. So we thought it would be useful to invite our distinguished panel members to tell you a little bit about their experiences in their field of work and how this is reflected in the Greek market. The aim of this panel is to give you first-hand insights on what happened in the last AGM season and what is required to take Greek companies to the next level, both in terms of disclosure, but also in terms of engagement. In terms of speakers, we're pleased to be joined by a team of very distinguished experts. Andrea Di Segni, Managing Director of Morrow Sodali. Morrow Sodali is a leading provider of shareholder services to corporate clients around the world, who's been active in the Greek market for over a decade. Vasilis Kaminaris, Head of Assurance, Southeast Europe for Ernst & Young Greece. Ernst & Young is a global leader in assurance, tax, transaction, and advisory service, and he acts as an auditor for a lot of the Greek issuers, so a lot of experience to be said on what happened in the last season. Philip Bernardis, Vice President, Asset Stewardship for State Street Global Advisors. State Street is one of the largest world investors and one of the top 10 foreign investors in the Greek market. They're also an investor who has one of the largest stewardship teams globally and has been very vocal and active about various governance initiatives over the years and ongoing. Patrick Fiorani, Research and Engagement, Continental Europe for Glass Lewis & Co. Glass Lewis is one of the leading, the two largest international proxy advisors who's actively been covering and engaging with issuers in the Greek market for a good number of years now. And last but not least, Gianmarco Montanari, Non-Executive Director and Chair of the Remuneration Committee for Fineco Bank. We invited Gianmarco to join our panel because he's part of the Southern European universe of companies that has been also proactively engaging with investors under his role as REM Chair. So he has very kindly agreed to share his experience with us in the hope that this can guide the Greek board member audience that we have on today. So with that introduction, Andrea, maybe we'll start with you. Can you share with us the results of how you've gathered, that you've managed to gather for the 2020 proxy season? You're on mute, Andrea.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Very happy that we have so many people participating in this webinar. And I would like to give you the idea what's happening in the 2020 AGM season in Greece, comparing to the most important financial markets in Europe. So you better understand where the market is comparing to the others. And also we would like to, let's say, given you some tips, some ideas, some suggestions to how to approach the new 2021 season. We can start with the presentation. Oh, there's. Okay, please next. Oh, it's coming back.
Sorry, we're just trying to find the right
yes,
link.
We waiting for the presentation. I just starting from the participation at the 2020 AGM season. We obviously take in consideration only general meeting, and the metrics between 2018 and 2020 is okay. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, here we are. That is the metrics of the last 3 years, 2018, 2019, and 2020. In terms of participation, the free float, and the participation of the free float, which means the investors that voted at the AGM comparing to the total numbers of institutional investors. As you can see, there is a lower participation in general in the Greek issuers comparing to other markets. Probably the decrease that we have seen from the participation of institutional investors, the global participation is mainly mainly affected by a lower participation by institutional investors. If you can see on the black line below, comparing to the almost 50% participation by institutional investors in the 2020, there was a decrease in 2 years, there was a decrease by 10%. So it's almost 45.57. And obviously, this participation is not in line with the other financial market in Europe, basically Spain, Italy, France, UK, or Germany, where the participation is higher. So we, in this respect, it's important to underline that we do believe that in the next future there will be more participation by institutional investors, because we have seen this kind of growth in any markets considering the last 15 years. So it's only a matter of time, but it will. We do believe that the Greek AGM in the future will have a greater participation by institutional investors. If we go to the next slide, please. These slides outline the support, the average support to Greek general meetings. And as you can see, the numbers are quite good. So generally speaking, there is an important support by institutional investors on the general level of the proposals that has been submitted to the general meeting. The differences are, if we take in consideration the total vote for the specific for the average proposal, or if we take the free float, which is usually all the institutional investors worldwide. And the other numbers is if we count or not the abstention vote, which may have an impact. But in terms of the comparison with the normal average support in the European markets, we can say that there is a high and stable average support to Greek AGMs comparing to Europe. Next, please. In this, take in consideration two specific matters, which are the board elections and the remuneration proposal. Because as you can imagine, these are the two topics that the investors would like to have more clarity and can express their support or they signal to the boards with a vote. As you can see, in this specific case, there is a higher support from Greek companies comparing to all the other companies in Europe, both in the overall support and the free float support. The only one that is very close to the numbers of Greece is the FTSE 100, which is the UK index. In respect to this, we would like to underline two elements in terms of the succession planning that has been put in place by Greek boards and the disclosure that has been provided to the market are quite aligned with the investor expectation. And this is, I think, it's a very important result for the Greek financial market. There is there's still one specific issue that sometimes create problems and difficulties to investors to accept the management proposal, which is the bundled election proposal, which obviously is not really in line with what is happening in other markets in Europe, apart Italy, where there is votes by list, but all the other markets, they have single directors election in the end. So this is not obviously cannot be considered at a Europe level, not a best practice, but as you can imagine, similar to what is happening in Italy, this is the way that the board is elected. So this is one of the situations where the regulation of the market are different comparing to what is considered a best practice. But to my opinion, probably this is not a situation where the board will not receive the support they deserve. So if you can see, we have a clear increase of support by institutional investors on the board election if we compare 2020 to 2018. And the result of this is probably more disclosure, transparency, but also I think an improvement in the diversities and the skills of the board member, including international directors, which obviously are the things that the investors would like to see on the companies they invest. We can go to the next slide. So now we enter into the remuneration matters, which obviously is always should be treated with attention. In relation to what is happening in a general support to remuneration proposal, you can see that there is a decrease, slight decrease from 2018 and 2020. But the free float investor support slightly increased. The result is clearly in line with all the most important European financial market, the DAX 30, the CAC 40, and the Italian MIB or the IBEX 35 in Spain. So basically, we can say that actually the support by institutional investors to the remuneration proposal submitted by the board in 2020 is good and product positive results. Obviously, as we consider, and based on our conversation with many investors, last year was a new, let's say, similar to a new year, a change completely into how to approach to remuneration proposal, and for sure the investors have the possibility to they understood that this is a new paradigm, especially for the green market, in order to be transparent, more transparent, and to provide metrics that probably in the past have never been provided. So I do believe that, as in all European market, the investors has been very delicate in identifying situation where they didn't want to give their support. So basically, a sort I use this kind of similarity, but it's like when we talk about soccer, there was no red cards, there were some yellow cards, and so basically this I think has been a very behavior by investors in this respect. For the 2020, we do believe that the situation could be a little bit different. So it is important that the boards still continue to provide more clarity, more transparency on the pay. If we switch on, having said this, if we move to the next slide, we entering in more in detail, taking in consideration the two fundamental remuneration proposal. The first one is the policy, and the second one is a report where the company should disclosure what has been paid. Is it clear that the policy and the report receive less support than the other remuneration related voting items? I do believe that this probably is not something unexpected, but for sure the metrics that we have seen are probably fine for given the situation, the new context, and there is for sure space for increase the support given to the investors, more transparency on how the remunerations policy has been set, the framework, and the overall pay on the report. We can also say that the large discrepancy between the overall and the free float support indicates the companies with a large strategic holders disregard the minority investors' preferences. So this is not very different from many other market, what is happening in many other markets, what's happening in the past. So it is obvious that when there is a strong control of the AGM, the management or the board probably tend to provide, let's say, less information. But again, I do believe that in the future, with probably an increased participation by institutional investors, also for Greece, a new way to treat remuneration matters is necessary. So basically, more transparency, If we go to the next slide, because I don't want to take too much time. What we can say, taking into consideration in 2021. 2020 has been a very difficult year, financially speaking, but also for all the people around the world, obviously. But the approach by investors, what we have seen in our discussion, was that at this time there was a lot of analysis by investors to understand the level of pay, the overall level of pay of issuers, comparing to the result that they had in the year. So to avoid any exit pay, comparing to the fact that there was no dividends or the price of the stock was falling for months. In this respect, if we go to the board election, we do expect a more scrutiny by investors on the candidates for the board, and I do believe that the journey the Greek board has done in terms of increasing diversities and skills within the board may help investors to more support the board. So I think the suggestion that we can say that is important, that a diversity analysis should be done to understand where it's possible to make an improvements. That is something that will be very appreciated by institutional investors. The other aspect is I would like to spend last 1 minute on the ESG. I think it is not only because we are facing tremendous year, the sustainability aspect are clearly important, because when we get into a boardroom, the way the board approached the COVID-19 is one of the elements of the sustainability. And what we have seen that has been very difficult for board to act very promptly. There has been many situations where the board act with delay compared to the situation. So what we think in the future, and we have been said by many investors that all the ESG factors are for sure much more important right now after the COVID, but not because of the COVID, because it's clear to everyone that if there is no consideration of the non-financial aspect, the risks, the financial risks that may happen in a company are clearly greater. So I think that the COVID, apart what is the bad situation that bring to all of us, demonstrate that if there is the financial issues, financial metrics, financial factors, the risk is really higher.
Andrea, can I stop you there? I kind of answered some of the questions that I wanted to ask, but should we maybe skip to the presentation and move this to Vasilis in terms of moving how the AGMs are. Thank you so much, Andrea. We'll get to more questions afterwards. Vasilis, you must have seen a significant amount of remuneration reports last year. So what was your perspective on how things went?
Hi, Emilia. Good evening, everybody. I assume you can hear me right now, correct? Okay. Actually, it's been quite an interesting period because we've seen lots of reports, and we also had lots of discussions in the Institute of Accountants because we had to finalize the terms under which the audit reports would be issued. So I have to admit we were expecting quite intensively the reports to come out, and we were looking for various reports from companies to see what and how is disclosed in the reports. So I gladly accepted the invitation to present in this event the summary of the 2019 reports, which I will be showing to you in a snapshot in just a few slides, just to create some discussion out of it. So it was one of the topics, I would say the most hot topic of the year, and what I would like to discuss is obviously a small introduction about this presentation to refresh the legal framework in a snapshot, because I assume that most of the people in the audience already know what are the key provisions of the law and the key takeaways from the report. So what the snapshot would give us as the main information. So this is a presentation which aims to present the picture of what has happened in the 2019 reports. It focuses on the FTSE Large Cap Index of the Athens Exchange, which essentially is 25 companies under the following sectors. I guess most of the people know exactly which are these companies. These are well-known large corporates, banks, the Athens Exchange. So just a snapshot of the legal framework to remind ourselves what the law requires. So if you remember, it was Law 4548 of 2018, more specifically it's Article 112. So companies that are listed in a regulated market they have to prepare a clear and understandable remuneration report. Now these words are quite essential, a clear and understandable. And you will realize why I'm focusing on these two words. It should include a complete overview of the remuneration as detailed in the company policy. Again, the policy We already know that in most cases the policy was approved in an extraordinary AGM, but we also had some cases where the annual general meeting of the shareholders approved the policy and the report at the same time, which was a bit strange, but it did happen. Now, the report should include all remuneration, including benefits awarded or owed, this is important, as provided by the policy, no matter if the board members are newly elected or not. And as a minimum, the report should include a number of items, which are the fixed and variable components, the various components, any profit sharing elements, obviously, an explanation of the performance criteria applied and the related calculations. And this is very, very interesting, the performance criteria and the calculations, and how the remuneration complies to the approved policy. Also, the law requires comparative analysis, and this is also very important for a number of 5 years. This was a topic of debate and concern. Obviously, there were transitional provisions which were taken in favor of a number of companies. And we would need an analysis of the remuneration of board members for the last 5 years, the company performance, and the average remuneration of full-time personnel, excluding executives. So you can imagine the number of debates and concerns and discussions that we had with respect to all of these items and all of these detailed provisions of the law. Going forward, the remuneration of board members from good companies, that was another topic of discussion, the number of shares, stock options granted, awarded, etc., any exercise stock options from board members, information with respect to the ability to receive variable remuneration, obviously, and any deviations from the policy, including an explanation of the extraordinary circumstances under which such deviation has occurred. So this is the flexibility element of the law. So no matter if there is a policy, if the company had to deviate because of certain circumstances, extraordinary circumstances, still this is something that is allowed. It's allowed. Now the report, again, this is the provision of the law. The report is submitted for discussion to the AGM under an advising vote. This is an advising vote, so the AGM does not approve, and the board should explain in the following AGM how the voting results were taken under consideration. The report should be publicly available for a period of 10 years. So this is more or less what we've seen in other markets, and we have experiences from other markets. And without any delay, because I would like also to respect the time of the speakers, let's see the key takeaways. So that was a very interesting element, because I had to read the reports of many companies, and I spent some time on that, but it was quite fun because as you can imagine, it's always nice and interesting to see what the different companies do. This is part of our profession in any case. So first of all, there is a significant differentiation in the style and content. And that was a major issue, because you see different, even companies within the same sector, you could see different style and different presentation elements. And this relates to the overview of the business, to the presentation on how the policy is presented, the presentation of the details of the various programs, comparative data, that was another element of great debate, even the definition of key management personnel. It may sound to you a bit strange, but even on how companies define the various titles and roles, this is still a different certain respect. In general, I would say there is a clarity, an overall lack of clarity of how variable remuneration is linked to company performance. This is a very strong point. In some cases, it was very difficult to understand how the variable compensation, the variable remuneration is calculated, and how it is related to the company's performance. There were inconsistencies found in member titles, in roles, in identities, which was a bit strange, I have to admit, and confusing. This is also an area of improvement, I would say, definitely for all issuers. Moving on, half of the reports included a brief overview. This is a very useful element, I have to admit, as a reader. I'm not the auditor of most of these companies, but a brief overview of the company's performance is very useful to allow the reader to have a good understanding of what was the company's current performance. And in most of the cases, the reports included a brief, at least a brief presentation of the approved remuneration policy. That was approximately 75%. There was one case where a company reported a deviation from the remuneration policy. However, from the text, it was not evident what are the extraordinary circumstances why such a deviation occurred. So we would expect to see extraordinary circumstances for such a deviation. Remuneration reports, and that was also something that was mentioned by Andrea, were approved on average with a vote of 92%. Now, this is not, to me, this is not the most important. The most important is the minimum and the maximum. We had votes up to 100% almost, but we also had votes of 65%. And I believe this is quite low. So this is a takeaway. And definitely, I fully agree with Andrea, companies need to engage in a better manner when it comes to these votes and seek for a higher voting percentage. And we had one case where the report was not subject to the advisory vote by the AGM. And this is also a bit strange because the law is quite clear. At least we could not find in the minutes or in any other parts of publicly available information whether the report was subject to the vote by the AGM. Now, we had two cases where it was not clear whether any deviation has occurred. Okay, this is a compliance issue. I guess there was no deviation, and that is why it was not clear. The law requires a clear statement. That could be also a point of improvement. And there was one case, and this is also very interesting, out of 220 non-executive directors, there was one case where one NED received variable remuneration. That was really interesting. It was only one case out of 200 something cases of non-executive directors. Now, some further statistics and key takeaways. The average size of a report was 10 pages. Okay, you know, all these statistics have certain meanings. The minimum was 2 pages, the maximum was 28. So there is a great amount of variation between the different versions of reports that we've seen. Keep in mind, the average size of a board was 11 members, minimum 5 to maximum 15. So this is okay. And the average number of NEDs in the board was 8, minimum 1 and maximum 13. So again, a great amount of variation. And if anything is to be taken out of these studies or presentations or events, is the importance of having more than one NEDs in the board. So NEDs represented approximately 70% of all board members. The average remuneration received was 60.5 thousand. Again, there is a great amount of variation, And as I mentioned earlier, one person receiving variable remuneration. Finally, the issue of diversity. Women represented 14% of all board members. 14%, this is very low. And as you can understand, there is a great amount of need for female talent. This is a very important message. I keep stressing this issue in all meetings I have with board members. This is very important. It's not so easy to go out and find available females and put them in boards. So we need to make sure that females and boards are educated on how to get there, and succession planning is important, with an average of 2. And what is more important, most important is that there are boards with 0 and one board with a maximum of 5. So this is really an area of improvement, and also because the law has a certain period, the new corporate governance law has a certain period of implementation, there is not much time left. there's not much time ahead. So
Great
this is
change in that, right? Anyway,
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So these are the key takeaways and the key messages. Overall, as a key message, I would say it was a good first implementation. Definitely, there is room for improvement. We would need to see more clarity, more transparency, and a better presentation of calculations and link to overall company performance. It was a good start. Congratulations to everybody, and we hope to see improved reports in the next second season.
Thank you, Vasilis. I think you raised some very nice and interesting statistics. Out of curiosity, because I think I had that conversation with some issuers as well. There were issuers that had created a very extensive, nice and detailed remuneration report, but they chose to present a shorter version at the AGM. So did you see any shorter versions knowing that there was more complete data behind the scenes? Or did you see that there, obviously there's a variation of the size, but did you see shorter versions being presented?
Frankly, that was not possible to identify and to spot on, because the publicly available information is what is presented after all on the convention. So I couldn't tell after all. But definitely, what I can tell you is there is a great amount of differentiation. So this is also another thing that we could help the market improve, to seek for some standardization, which in essence would help comparability and transparency. Sure.
And I think what you're right, that it's our role to try and help the market. And before
Right.
we to Philip to see how investors can also help the market, maybe the link to there is there. In some cases, reports show if companies they report if they've engaged with investors and taken in that feedback to improve, to enhance their reports. Did you see any commentary regarding shareholder engagement in any of these reports, in some or in any?
No, unfortunately, there weren't any comments.
Okay.
Now, obviously, in cases where there is a voting for at the level of 99%, we wouldn't expect any comments overall, but I haven't seen any.
Okay.
So this is something for in the next engagement discussions and initiatives. I would highly suggest to bring the topic to the discussion and get the comments of companies. This is very important.
Okay, thanks so much. I think on that link, let's move over to Philip. Philip, maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview of how State Street Global Advisors stewardship team works in terms of what you cover and the focus first.
Thanks, Malia, and delighted to be here today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Philip Bernardes. I work for State Street Global Advisors. I'm responsible for engaging with our investing companies on ESG issues and proxy voting. At State Street Global Advisors, asset stewardship has become part of our DNA. So it is very important for us to engage with our investing companies in order to drive positive ESG behaviors and changes. Just to explain a little bit how we work and taking a step back, State Street Global Advisors is predominantly an index manager. And that basically means that unlike active managers, we don't have the ability to sell our stock as long as they're part of the index. So we cannot turn, let's say, the S&P 500 into the S&P 499. So what we do is we engage, and using our voice and vote as shareholders, we've seen success through companies improving on issues such as gender diversity, climate change, executive compensation, and the business strategy. Again, as an index manager, we're invested in over 12,000 companies globally. So as you can imagine, it is impossible for us to engage with them all. So as such a large investor, prioritization is essential to the effectiveness of our asset stewardship activities. what we do and the way we prioritize engagements, where we use in order to make more impact, because it's all about impact for us. We use portfolio exposure, we use negative ESG screens and factors, and we also have a stewardship priority plan, which is based on certain themes every year and sector priorities. And then based on that, we target companies for engagement. So when I say, so for example, thematic priorities, this is for 2020, some of our themes are now, as you would expect, COVID-19, which initially, of course, at the beginning of the year wasn't part, but it has risen to the top of our agenda. Same climate change, executive compensation, and board accountability. With Greek companies, we've basically seen some improvement in recent years compared to, I remember, like 7 or 8 years ago, where I first called my Greek company to engage, and I was asking about executive compensation, and they were like, "Why do you want to know about our executive compensation?" And it was like, "Do you publish your remuneration on your website?" So I was like, "Okay, that's not a good start." But since then, clearly, companies have improved. We've seen, like, a few companies being like more of a leaders in Greece, but there's definitely room for improvement. So further engage myself, although I don't predominantly cover, and I want to make it clear, like the Greek market, but I've engaged in the last couple of years with probably over 10 companies in Greece. And I think that there's definitely like more to be done there. So more disclosure, more engagement, and it's also like, for example, when you engage with the chair of the company, we want to be able to engage more with boards. And I think that boards also should incorporate, and it's very important for us to incorporate ESG into their long-term strategy and provide oversight of that. And we have not, let's say, seen clear evidence that this is happening to the Greek market yet. I guess some of the things that, and probably what we've seen, I mean, COVID was a main issue of engagement for us, and it has, as you would expect, like, it significantly changed things. When I say, like, the positive things that I've personally seen, and obviously I've been working from home, spending more time with my daughter, and probably less time with my mother-in-law, like I said to you yesterday. So jokes aside, I think that COVID has served well to highlight how environmental, social, and governance issues are more relevant than ever. And the pandemic has, first of all, showed us how a global health crisis can become a profound social issue. And as a result, during the season, many of our discussions with investing companies focused on social responsibility, on employee health, human capital, and ensuring the overall safety of supply chains. So this is also something that we would like to see more from Greek companies, communicate that more, and ultimately also incorporate that into their executive compensation schemes. And I think, especially when it comes to executive compensation, as you would expect during a crisis of this magnitude, we're increasingly sensitive to quantum and increases in quantum. We want these, like, to be really justified when they happen, and we expect, like, boards and executives alike to take, like, into account, I guess, like what's the human capital and overall workforce when they take, I guess, like, their executive compensation decisions. But again, this is something that we've seen some companies, more like in Western Europe, improving on, but certainly I would say, like, the Greek market is a little bit more, maybe, like, behind. But we've seen, like, at least with a couple of companies, that there's more evidence that hopefully, like, we would expect in the next year or so for more, like, Greek companies to actually include that and communicate more on that and show us how executive compensation is linked to the overall strategy of the company, and also explain more about the human capital element.
Thank you, Philip. And I mean, you've pretty much answered all the questions that I had ready to ask you. I do have one question, however. I mean, you say that you covered 12,000 companies, which is an incredible amount. and therefore obviously you're not reaching out to everybody, but if the Greek universe of companies wants to reach out to you, is this something that you welcome? Is this something you have time for?
Yes, we definitely welcome. We would welcome that, and we have an open door, I would say, policy. Okay. Having said that, because as you would expect, given our size, some of our investment in Greece compared to investments in the US and Western Europe are relatively small. So we would expect when we do these engagements to let's keep this and do these engagements when they're necessary and when they're meaningful. So we would expect, for example, when we do these engagements to at least have some board members present. So and also for companies to do this in a meaningful way, in a way like when we engage with investing companies, we also expect that boards are there and they're also willing and happy to take shareholder feedback. So yeah, I think that's also important. Involve key persons and I guess also consider shareholder feedback.
Perfect. That's I think that's very useful, and I think that even as a takeaway, let's say that it's Greek companies should be more proactive if they're going to and build the right team to be able to come and see you if that's the case. Okay, thanks. I'm just looking at the time, so I'm going to skip over to Patrick now. And as one of the largest proxy advisors, perhaps you have your overview of how the last season went and the introduction of the new introduction of the remuneration reports, but maybe you want to tell us a little bit more as well how Glass Lewis operates in the Greek market?
Sure. I guess to sum it up succinctly, when we provide reports for institutional investors with recommendations on each item on the agenda of your meetings, of Greek company meetings, pardon. This is done through sort of a stepwise fashion where the report is seen by various people, verified, and additional analysis added. I guess the key point here is that for us to deviate from our guidelines, which are publicly available, the senior analyst would have to sign off. So when every request for deviation, let's say, in public company documents where a company motivates a particular practice that isn't quite market standard, is taken seriously and evaluated individually. In terms of our coverage, we cover less of the Greek market than we do many other markets. So you're talking about 40-odd companies in 2020. We wrote 68 reports on them, but that's up from 2019 with 10 extra companies. But unfortunately, it's down from a peak pre-financial crisis where we were covering about 70-odd. So it's growing again, but it had fallen. I guess the key issue for us in terms of the bigger picture when it comes to our analysis in Greece is disclosure. Greek market is lagging behind to a certain extent. It is lagging behind. The bigger markets that are a little bit more useful to used to disclosing and have sort of years of disclosure that they've built upon. In terms of the amount of information, its quality, but also its timing. And this is quite important for our process, because if we cannot provide a report in useful time for the client, he cannot express his vote through the proxy chain by proxy. So we have on occasion been forced to recommend an abstain on certain proposals because the information simply wasn't provided in time. So there's in terms of the amount and quality of information, it's improving very quickly. So whereas I would compare it to say, I don't know who would understand this comparison, but like Italy maybe 5 years ago, 4 years ago in terms of the quality of disclosure, but the speed of improvement is quicker. So with the SRD2 and the corporate governance, the new corporate governance law, a lot of that has sort of been forced to happen. So we're getting more information. It's always possible to follow the letter of the law and provide boilerplate. It doesn't mean a whole lot though. So it's an opportunity for issuers to have meaningful conversations and communication with their shareholders. But we have noticed that some seem to either through inexperience or for some other reason haven't quite seized that opportunity. So yeah, timing is crucial for our process. Now, maybe a word on compensation. I think since it's sort of always the most interesting topic, or the topic that most people are interested in. In terms of the disclosure, again, it's sort of lagging behind, given that it's a new exercise for Greek companies. We sort of, in these couple of years, we've had sort of lower expectations than we do for other markets. I mean, the key thing for us is upholding the best market practices as this today. We're not on a crusade to try and change the way corporate governance is done in Greece, certainly. But we reward the best in class and penalize those who lag behind. In terms of the disclosure, it was often difficult to make an assessment because key elements weren't provided, both forward-looking in the policy and backward-looking. So if the metrics are unknown or are not clearly defined, it's not possible to trace a line between performance and pace. So with the remuneration report, that's exactly what we're doing. We're looking at the implementation of the policy and we're comparing it to performance. With the policy, it's more of a structural assessment. So there's sort of the idea of long-term alignment with shareholders through the various incentive schemes is sort of more the focus in our analysis for the policy section. That being said, there were elements of both that were often missing. Some companies did a very good job, others a bit less, as I said before. So we'd like to see more information on severance arrangements, non-compete agreements, sort of the sides of the main course were the remuneration report were often lacking. Things like shareholder guidelines, if there's a policy for extraordinary payments in the future, that's also something that's quite valuable to know, so as not to surprise people when they're actually made. But if there isn't disclosure of the metrics and ideally the targets, it's very hard for us to recommend approval because we can't make an assessment. Just one short final line in terms of the future. Responsiveness to shareholder concern is one of the key drivers of our recommendations, and more so every year, not just because it's our policy, but also it's demanded by our clients. So what we would consider shareholder opposition, significant shareholder opposition, is about 20% of the free float. So we take companies' capitalist structure of the company into consideration as well. So for the votes, and there were a number of companies that didn't reach that threshold. Ideally, we would like to see some evidence that an engagement process was carried out, even if it's just reading the guidelines of your top shareholders to try and confront that with your current policy. Because I know it can be difficult to get an actual call with for smaller companies, especially in a market like Greece. So some evidence of that would be great. We're looking for that. And then the last thing for next year is going to be the impact of COVID. So we have some information out there on our blog that goes into a little bit of technical detail. Suffice it to say for now that it's important that the executives not be the only stakeholder that is shielded from the impact of COVID. So when shareholders, when employees, even and other stakeholders are suffering, are adversely affected by the situation, sort of exceptional arrangements or modifications of existing plans that safeguard payout would really be seen in a poor light.
Perfect. Thank you. That's really good.
I hope.
I was going to ask just one question. When do you, and I think the same, I'll ask Philip afterwards before we move to Gianmarco's valuable experience, I think, which will incorporate everything he's done with both of you. But when do you guys would like to be engaged with? Because a lot of, historically, this engagement or solicitation has taken place around the AGM. And I know for a fact that you're quite busy during that time. So when is the ideal time for you to be engaging with a broad team, with a board member, with a team, with an IR team, with a COSEC team? When is the best time?
Sure. I guess solicitation is what we're specifically trying to avoid. So from the moment the notice of meeting is published to the meeting itself, we actually won't have a back and forth conversation, because one, the resolution's already decided, so it's not really there's not really anything to talk about their content. So I guess when the issuer is working on their remuneration policy, especially if they have seen our guidelines and they want to know how something fits with them, sits with them, that's a useful conversation. That's, I think, helps both of us, both parties. So it can go from, say, September for really eager companies that are already ready, to even January, or even February, depending on when their meeting is. So as long as as the feedback that we provide, as the exchange can even potentially lead to an improvement of the governance of the proposals being proposed at the AGM, that's valuable. Once that's too late, I'm not saying that we refuse a call, especially if it's the first time. It's good to get to know the companies that we want to have, an ongoing relationship with. But it's not going to. You're not going to get us to change our mind. Okay. Essentially, once too late.
I would very much agree with Patrick. So we expect boards to involve us and engage with us when they are actually formulating their proposals, and that they can actually take feedback into account. So I would probably say that well, at least for me, the role model, it would probably be like the UK system, where companies generally engage like September. In October, they involve the right individuals, they involve the executive compensation chair, in many cases also the chairman, the chairwoman. So is generally during that period, because like Patrick said, I mean, if you come to us like just during the proxy season, even if we don't let's say agree with something, it's probably too late to change things. So yeah, I would generally I would definitely recommend to come to us early. And the other thing, of course, that Patrick mentioned, during proxy season anyway, we're so busy that, and again, it goes back to the 12,000 companies that we invested, that the number that I mentioned earlier, that it is impossible for us to see all companies, whereas in September, October, it's probably it's a much better time of the year to engage.
Perfect, thank you. And I think on that note, let's move to someone who's dealt with all of this and quite proactively. Gianmarco, as the REM chair of a listed company, which I was told yesterday has a pretty much nearly 100% free float, you need to be having a good relationship and keeping these shareholders happy. So you must be engaging quite actively. So maybe you can share your experience of what this role entails from your end, how you engage with investors on remuneration-related matters, and has this been helpful for you?
Thank you very much. Let me say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the invitation. It's a very pleasure to be here, and I like the speeches before very much. I try to share my presentation, and that should be work. I hope. I think it's working, right? Yeah. If you don't say anything, it's okay. If it's okay. Okay, let me start. I'd like to share with you my experience as a non-executive director and leader in this outreach campaign in Fineco Bank. But I just start from my personal experience. I'm Gianmarco Montanari. I'm an innovator from inside, let me say, because I always apply innovation in all the roles I have in my life. And at the moment, I'm also General Director of IIT, that is it is the Italian Institute of Technology. And despite the name, is an international institute. working on research and especially applied research. And we are focused in robotics and AI, artificial intelligence, in nanomaterials, life tech, and computational sciences. So we are working only on the best of breed of innovation size in the market today. We are at roughly 2,000 people coming from more than 60 different countries in the world, and with more than 20 different disciplines, and roughly equal gender balance, because we do only STEM scientific research. So having more than 40% of female in our population is an amazing, extraordinary result in our field. And this because before Vasilios shows the number of women in the board of the Greek company, I perfectly agree with him when he said that I hope there will be more than the 2 or 3 in the average that are today, because it is important their contribution in the discussion in the board, in my personal experience, at least. But coming to non-executive director, let me just ask to participant an easy question: is it a professional job today? Because let me say, it's a job I'm doing in the last 15 years, and it's changed a lot. And one of the reasons I show here some name, if you think to the scandal of Wirecard this year in Germany, but in the famous Germany, but in these days we can read again about Grenke, is another scandal. But to come to my little Italy, we had a very big scandal in 2019 about BO. That was, and it looks like to be an extraordinary company working on smart materials and stuff like this. And we can go on. And just in these days, coming to Italy, we had a very high attack in the cyber risk with Leonardo, that is our giant company working on military services. So you can understand how important is information for this company. But at the same time, just last Tuesday, we had the same information of a hacking attack at Campari. Campari is a worldwide company working on drinking and stuff like this. So it is a very difficult time to do the job of non-executive directors. It's worse than before. Let me say an easy example. When I started 15 years ago to do this job, maybe I like to say that in a half board day, in a normal half board day, we spent maybe 1 hour and more for having lunch and make relations with the other board member. Instead, today we are always we spend more than half day on board, and we don't have time for sandwiches. So this is, I think, the more clear difference in how much is more difficult to do this job today, and you need to do this is not like a part-time job, but you have to spend a lot in knowing, in learning, and in updating with regulatory rule and all this kind of stuff. But coming to my experience I'm also NED in international multinational company of ICT services and the University of Turin. But let me go to the main topic is Fineco Bank. Fineco Bank at the moment is the 3rd bank of Italy for size. If you think when I joined Fineco Bank 5 years ago, we were we were just close to Mediolanum, so we were the two sides step back. But we grow a lot, and I show because the reason later. And today we are the third, just back to Intesa Sanpaolo and Unicredit. If we did this last year, this wasn't the case, because with COVID, and we grow a lot our market share due to the fact that we are a completely fintech bank from the beginning. And at the same time, as Emilia said before, we are completely listed. This is our shareholder composition in August. We see that we have BlackRock at first, that it has a little more of 8% of the share, and there are other three main shareholders, but 80% of the market is in the hand of less than 1% of shareholders. So we are completely a public company. Let me say, give you some numbers of the last quarter. We have 85 billion of total financial asset, and with a little less of 1.4 million clients in Italy and in Great Britain. I'll tell later. With a net profit adjusted of more than 2,046 million, and CET1 of 23.82%, and professional advisors or editors of 3,000 professional advisors. But this is our history. We started completely fintech at the end of the last centuries, only as a digital, completely autonomous and digital bank. Then we invest a lot in the brokerage. You have to say that today we are the first brokerage firm in Europe for the sites, and we grow with all our services. And in 2008, we took a good amount of from personal financial advisor, and we integrated them in our platform. And roughly when I come in 2017, we started our international growth, starting from UK, from Greenfield. And 1 year later, we started also our to product our asset management products with a branch based in Ireland. And 1 year later, last year, we completely go independent, because our main shareholders that were Unicredit Group sold all the shares in the market. So this is our history, and this is history, as I said before, that today in COVID time is more winning than before, because I show you we are completely fintech, and in this period in which everyone is going fintech, we grow a lot. This is our board of directors. As maybe I said before, we have 5 out of 11 women in the board of directors, and there are a lot of diversity in the background and the professional background. I'm president of the Remuneration Committee, and what we have done, as I said before, I'm innovator inside. So when I come in Fineco, it was 2017, and they nominated me as chair of the committee or the Remuneration Committee. I look outside and ask what I can do to improve the bank performance in my new position. I understood that the manage of an outreach campaign was a good issue. It was not done before. And the first thing I did, I asked to the CEO, my CEO that is a big bank, a well-known banker, if I can do this job. And he asked me without any problem that he believed me and I can do it. And I say this because, let me say, my personal experience in the Italian market is not so easy that a CEO that is the only guys that usually speak with the market, let another guys in the board to meet the market. So this is the first question you have to ask to yourself if you want to do this job. Is your CEO, your chair of the board, letting you this kind of job? The first one. The second one is, are you ready for this trip? Because it's not an easy trip. We started 4 years ago, and we did a lot of job before inside the firm, because we had to prepare all the cards. Everything it should be very well prepared, because when you face with the market, with people like Patrick, that is a guy we know very well, because we met a lot of time in this forum, and he gave us a lot of very useful suggestions. It's not easy, in particular when you start, because market asks you a lot of things, and you need to have the right answer. And so you have to be very prepared about this. You can see here the figures of the last 3 years, and you can see with how we started from 94.9%, and we reached 98% of positive voters in the last AGM. And if you think that these are votes of a completely public company, is a very high percentage of vote. And at the same time, in this slide, and I'm going to finish, you can see what were the numbers. We started with the outreach campaign coverage of the percentage of shareholders of 46%, and reached 59% last year. And I think we do a lot more in these weeks. You asked before, when is the better way to meet to do this kind of campaign? I have to say that in our experience, November and December are very hot time, because as said before by Patrick, you are, and also by Philip, you need to have the figures, the numbers, but you can go to January and February, that is too hot period to meet investors. So November, December is always, in my experience, the period in which you have to work more in meeting investors. And if you see also the number of investors, is a good number of 60 different investors, is a good number. And you can see also the geographic split. This is, of course, due to the kind of investor you have in your firm. And you can see as the number and the percentage of the investor coming from UK and US grew in the last 2 years. Instead, we lost in percentage some investor coming from France. And I close. So my takeaway, let me say, don't underestimate this job, because it's very tough. Do your homework, and in preparing all the cards, and you have to be very linked to also to HR direction of the firm, because you need their help in providing all information, and you need also to know very well the firm, because in the meeting you you have to be able to ask to different matter, and especially in this period of COVID time, you have to be able to explain a lot of situation to the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gianmarco. I think it's evident that you've shown the uphill progress that you guys have done through this work. So congratulations. We've kind of run over quite a bit, so I'm going to round this up a little bit and see if anyone has any last comments. But in terms of, I think takeaways, one, ESG, it's at the forefront of all things, and this is being stepped up by COVID as well. I think, I mean, Velos Advisory published a report last week called Intelligence, which looks at investors' expectations and outlooks for 2021. ESG integration is what it is about. And I believe in terms of remuneration, we haven't seen it much in group. It is coming that I think investors will be looking at KPIs incorporating criteria in terms of and how COVID has managed through the process. Perhaps I will ask Patrick and Philip if you have any points on that before I close with the takeaways and leave Lita with some final words as well.
I think for us, it is very important that companies focus on the right ESG issues.
Yeah.
And the ESG issues that are material, financially material to their sector. So we've seen in the past some companies that they would focus like on the wrong metrics, and that even can destroy value if you deploy capital like, not towards the right ESG metrics. So in fact, we would expect to see, and we have communicated this to investing companies, ESG as part of their executive compensation. The way at the moment that we do this and the way we assess this, and I guess like, the ESG factors in investing companies is via our own proprietary system, which we call the R factor, and is an ESG scoring methodology developed by us that leverages multiple data sources and aligns them to widely accepted, transparent, materially frameworks to generate unique ESG companies, unique ESG score for listed companies. And this is what we call the R factor. The way it works, it utilizes SASB's materiality framework, which is, as you know, widely accepted by investors representing over $30 trillion in AUM. And this is, we believe that it's the way forward. So for companies to make their own assessments, consider SASB's methodology and framework, and focus on what's financially, ESG metrics that are financially material to them. And of course, reflect that into their executive compensation. So
thank you. And Patrick, I mean, you must be getting that request from some of your clients, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I agree 100% with what Philip said in terms of materiality is really key. And also agree on the SASB methodology, which we include elements of in our reports. What I will say maybe to get a little bit more technical, because we're looking at nuts and bolts, is do tell us obviously what metric you're using. Tell us also why, but also how you measure it. Because unlike financial indicators that we've got hundreds of years of agreement on, a lot of these are relatively new. Now some are older than others, but especially if it's something that is created by the company itself, an indicator, a scoreboard, something like that, we're going to need details of how the performance is actually measured. So that's the only thing I'd add to that.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to close this by saying that never has engagement been more critical. I mean, I think for the sake of our audience, you've heard it from every side. You need to be proactive. You shouldn't wait for these lovely investors and proxy advisors to come to you. Reach out, tell your story, and speak up and get your voices heard. If you build your story and you engage, the results will show. I mean, I think Andrea and I and the experts on this, and even from Vasily's side, we have this experience and we've seen the relationships being built. So from my side as a moderator, I'd like to thank you all for your contributions. And Lida, I'll leave it to you to close this, if you like.
Yeah, thank you, Emilia. Thank you, everybody. We've managed to gather, experts from the assurance market, like Vasilis, from proxy advisors like Patrick, institutional investors like Philip, and consultants and advisors like Velos, Emilia, and Andrea Diseni, and last but not least, Gianmarco as a REM chair from an Italian bank. So we had different views from different sides of the story of different players, and I think it all comes down that quality disclosure and engagement is a key factor, something as Greek companies, we should put our attention to, and it's something we should do before the 2021 AGM season, especially now we've got the new corporate governance law out, which incorporates lots of European best practices. So thank you all. Have a good evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
All the best.
Bye. Bye. Best.